Here's what you're about to find out. Why soil farmed for 300 years keeps getting more fertile. The exact afternoon timing that outperforms morning watering. What Amish seed saving actually selects for and why it matters. Why copying these tricks alone still leaves most gardeners behind. A single Amish family farm in Lancaster County regularly outproduces its commercial neighbors on a fraction of the acreage. No synthetic fertilizer, no pesticide spray schedules, no irrigation systems running on borrowed water. The yields are not modest. They are, by measurable comparison, extraordinary. Researchers who have studied these farms for decades still struggle to fully explain the gap. Part of the answer is soil. Part is timing. Part is a set of techniques passed between generations so quietly that most of the outside world never noticed them at all. This is what 17 of those techniques actually look like and why they work. To understand why these methods work, you have to understand what Amish farming actually is. It is not nostalgia. It is not a philosophical rejection of progress for its own sake. It is a system built under genuine constraint, no grid electricity, limited mechanical power, tight community budgets, where every input that costs money or outside labor gets replaced by observation and timing. That pressure, sustained over roughly 300 years of North American farming, produced something genuinely efficient. Waste was not tolerated because it could not be afforded. The result is a gardening culture where the soil itself is treated as the primary crop. The Amish have been farming the same land in Lancaster County since the 1720s. That is over 300 years of continuous cultivation on soil that, by conventional expectations, should be exhausted. It is not. Penn State Extension studies have found that topsoil depth on long-held Amish farms averages several inches deeper than on neighboring conventional farms of the same age. Organic matter content is measurably higher. Water retention is better. None of that happened by accident. It happened because each generation inherited a specific understanding of what the soil needs and treated feeding it as a daily obligation, not an annual event. Technique 1 is what Amish farmers call feeding the ground before you ask it for anything. Every autumn, before the first hard frost, organic matter goes into every bed: manure, compost, leaf mulch, straw, sometimes ground corn cobs. Not because a soil test recommended it, because the rule is simple. Whatever you took out during harvest season, you put back before winter. The ground rests under a blanket of organic material. Soil microbes and earthworms work through the cold months. By spring, that material has broken down into exactly the loose, dark, nutrient-dense layer that seedlings need. The bed is ready before the seed catalog even arrives. Technique 2 involves manure, but the timing matters more than most people realize. Raw manure applied in spring, right before planting, can actually burn seedling roots and introduces nitrogen in a form plants cannot immediately use. Amish farms apply manure in fall for exactly this reason. 6 months of cold weather and microbial activity transforms it into stable humus. The nitrogen stabilizes. The pathogens break down. What reaches the spring roots is balanced and slow releasing. This single shift in timing, fall application instead of spring, is something Penn State agronomists have verified produces measurably better early season growth. Most backyard gardeners still do it the wrong way around. Technique 3 is companion planting, and the Amish version of it predates the books written about it by at least 200 years. The classic combination is the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash planted in the same hill. Corn provides a vertical trellis. Beans fix atmospheric nitrogen directly into the root zone. Squash spreads its wide leaves across the ground, blocking weeds and locking in moisture. Each plant solves a problem the other two create. No fertilizer bag required. No herbicide needed for that section of the garden. It is a closed loop, and it produces 3 separate harvests from the same square footage. Many Amish families have grown this combination in the same beds for generations. Technique 4 is deep bed preparation. What some Amish gardeners describe simply as digging twice. The concept is called double digging. You remove the top layer of soil, loosen the subsoil below it with a fork to a depth of about 2 feet total. Then replace the top layer enriched with compost. Most gardeners till only the top 6 inches. Roots, especially carrots, parsnips, and beets, need twice that depth to develop properly. When the subsoil is compacted, roots hit a hard ceiling and stop. Yield drops, not because the plant lacks nutrients, but because it physically cannot expand. Double digging is slow, physical work. It is done once per bed and then maintained. The return in root vegetable yield is immediate and dramatic. Technique 5 is strict crop rotation, and the Amish follow a 4-year cycle with a discipline that most modern gardeners abandon after 1 season. The rule is never plant the same family of crop in the same bed 2 years running. Heavy feeders like tomatoes and corn go first. Then legumes, which rebuild nitrogen. Then root vegetables, which prefer lower nitrogen. Then a rest year with a cover crop. This cycle prevents the soil depletion that hits monoculture beds hard after 3 or 4 seasons. It also interrupts pest and disease cycles. The larva that overwintered expecting tomato roots finds beans instead and fails to complete its life cycle. Rotation is free. It costs no inputs at all. It simply requires a map and a memory. Technique 6 is cover cropping, the practice of planting a fast-growing crop specifically to be turned back into the soil rather than harvested. Winter rye, clover, buckwheat, and vetch are the most common choices on Amish farms. These are not wasted growing seasons. Winter rye develops a deep root system that breaks up compaction and then decomposes into nitrogen-rich green manure when tilled in spring. Buckwheat suppresses weeds so aggressively it can clear a neglected bed in a single season. Clover fixes nitrogen at rates that rival bagged fertilizer. Cover crops also prevent erosion over winter. Bare soil loses topsoil to rain and wind. A covered bed arrives at spring planting with more nutrients than it had at autumn harvest. Technique 7 is something that sounds almost too simple to mention, but has a measurable effect on germination rates. Amish gardeners test soil temperature before planting, not with a thermometer purchased from a garden center, but with their hands. The old rule is that soil ready to plant feels neither warm nor cold at 6 inches depth. It simply feels neutral. Modern soil thermometers confirm what this intuition tracks. Most vegetable seeds germinate poorly below 50 degrees Fahrenheit and stall, or rot, below 45. Planting 2 weeks too early into cold soil produces worse results than waiting. The Amish wait. They have learned patience not as a virtue, but as a practical strategy that saves seed and produces stronger stands. Technique 8 is seed saving, and the Amish practice it at a time level that most hobby gardeners have never attempted. Every season, the best performing plants are marked before harvest. Not the earliest, not the biggest, the most consistently productive under that specific farm's conditions. Seeds from those plants are dried, labeled, and stored. After 5 or 10 generations of selection in one place, those seeds carry genetic adaptations to that exact soil, that exact microclimate, those exact pest pressures. They germinate faster, resist local diseases better, and yield more reliably than commercial varieties grown under generic conditions. Commercial hybrid seeds perform well on average. Saved seeds perform well here. And here's where the garden actually is. Technique 9 addresses water, specifically the problem of watering at the wrong time. Most gardeners water in the morning because it feels right and fits a morning routine. Amish tradition waters in the late afternoon after the peak heat has passed, but with enough remaining daylight for leaf surfaces to dry before evening. This reduces fungal disease significantly. Wet leaves overnight invite mildew. Wet leaves at noon evaporate before the water reaches the roots. Late afternoon watering delivers moisture when transpiration slows, which means more of it reaches root depth rather than evaporating from the surface. This costs nothing to change. It requires only rescheduling 15 minutes of effort to a different time of day. Technique 10 is mulching, but the specific material and depth matter. Straw mulch, applied 3 to 4 inches deep around plants, does several things simultaneously. It suppresses weeds that would otherwise compete for nutrients and water. It moderates soil temperature, keeping roots cool during summer heat spikes that can shut down vegetable productivity. It retains moisture, reducing watering frequency by roughly half in dry summers, and as it breaks down through the season, it feeds the soil from the top down. Amish farms produce their own straw as a byproduct of grain crops, so the cost is essentially zero. Backyard gardeners can replicate this with spoiled hay or wood chip mulch from municipal composting programs. The straw just happens to be what is locally available. Technique 11 is succession planting, the practice of sowing the same crop in small batches every 2 to 3 weeks rather than all at once. Most gardeners plant their entire lettuce supply in one weekend in April and then wonder why they have more lettuce than they can eat for 3 weeks, and none at all in July. Amish kitchen gardens stagger plantings, so that a fresh harvest is always 2 to 3 weeks away. This also reduces risk. A late frost or pest outbreak that wipes out one planting does not eliminate the entire season's supply of that crop. Succession planting requires almost no additional effort, just smaller, more frequent sowings from the same seed packet stretched across a longer calendar window. Technique 12 is the use of cold frames, low, unheated wooden boxes with glass or clear plastic lids that sit directly on the garden bed. They are essentially unheated greenhouses a few inches tall. In Lancaster County winters, a cold frame extends the growing season by 6 to 8 weeks in both spring and fall. Spinach, kale, arugula, and root vegetables continue producing under a cold frame when outdoor temperatures are below freezing at night. Construction is simple. Salvaged window frames propped on short wooden sides. The Amish build them from scrap lumber and old windows that would otherwise be discarded. The total material cost in most cases is zero. The season extension is real and measurable. 6 additional weeks of harvest on either side of winter. Technique 13 is something the Amish do not call by any particular name. They simply do it every time they walk through the garden. It is the practice of harvesting continuously at peak rather than waiting for full maturity. Beans picked every 2 days instead of once a week stimulate the plant to produce more beans. Zucchini cut at 6 inches instead of 12 redirects the plant's energy to forming new fruit rather than expanding an existing one. Lettuce outer leaves taken while the center grows extends a plant's productive life by weeks. Each of these is a small decision made during a daily walk through the rows. Together, they add up to a yield difference that commercial growers have quantified at 20 to 40% more produce from the same plant. Technique 14 involves pest management without any purchased product. The first Amish tool against pests is observation. A gardener who walks every row every morning notices a pest problem when it involves a handful of insects rather than a full infestation. At that scale, hand picking works. Hornworms are removed by hand. Aphid colonies are knocked off with a stream of water. Cabbage worm eggs are spotted and crushed before they hatch. The second tool is planting strong scented herbs throughout the garden. Basil near tomatoes, nasturtiums as trap crops for aphids, tansy along borders to repel beetles. None of this requires spending money. It requires being present and paying attention, a form of labor that the Amish have always treated as simply part of gardening. Technique 15 is compost tea, a liquid fertilizer made from nothing but finished compost steeped in water for 24 to 48 hours. A bucket of mature compost, a bucket of water, and a day of waiting. The resulting liquid carries soluble nutrients and beneficial microorganisms directly to the root zone when poured around plant bases. Amish farms use compost tea as a mid-season boost, applied to heavy feeders like tomatoes, corn, and squash when fruit is forming and nutrient demand is highest. It provides a targeted feeding at exactly the right moment without any purchased input. Agronomists at the Rodale Institute, which has studied organic farming adjacent to Amish communities in Pennsylvania, have verified measurable growth responses from compost tea application during fruit set. Technique 16 is vertical growing, and the Amish version of it is built from whatever material is at hand. Pole beans on corn stalks, cucumbers on salvaged wire fencing. Tomatoes tied to wooden stakes cut from hedgerow prunings. The principle is simple. Growing vertically increases the productive surface area of a bed without expanding its footprint. A 10-foot row of cucumbers trained upright produces as much as a 20-foot row sprawling on the ground, and does it with less disease because air circulates freely around every leaf. The structural materials cost nothing because they come from the farm itself. In a small kitchen garden, shifting even 2 or 3 crops to vertical growing can measurably increase total yield from the same amount of ground. Now we reach technique 17, and it may be the most important one on this list because it is not a technique at all in the conventional sense. It is a habit of record keeping. Every Amish gardening family maintains what functions as a farm journal: when each crop was planted, how it performed, what the weather did, which beds produced best, which varieties struggled. This journal is not for publication. It is a private operational document passed from parent to child over decades. After 30 years, that journal contains more relevant local agricultural data than any university extension publication. It tells you exactly what works in your specific soil, your specific microclimate, your specific frost pattern. No outside research can replicate it. It is earned knowledge specific to one place. What makes these 17 techniques interesting as a group is that none of them were invented by the Amish. Cover cropping was practiced in ancient Rome. Companion planting appears in indigenous agricultural traditions across North America and Asia. Succession planting was standard kitchen garden practice in medieval Europe. What the Amish did was preserve these techniques as a coherent system when mainstream agriculture walked away from them in favor of synthetic inputs and mechanical scale. The rest of the farming world spent the 20th century replacing these methods with purchased solutions. The Amish simply kept doing what worked. When synthetic fertilizer prices spiked in the 1970s and again in the 2000s, Amish farms were largely unaffected. The system that looked like tradition turned out to be insulation against external dependency. Here is where the story gets complicated. Not every Amish farming practice translates easily to a suburban backyard. Some of the most effective techniques: large-scale manure application, multi-acre crop rotation, horse-drawn cultivation of deep beds, require space and livestock that most gardeners simply do not have. And the Amish themselves are not a uniform community. Different ordnung groups, the local church rules that govern what technology is permitted, vary significantly across regions. An old order Amish farm in Ohio operates differently from one in Indiana or Missouri. The techniques described here are drawn from the most widely shared practices, but no single Amish farm practices all 17 in exactly this form. The system is not a fixed doctrine. It is a living set of adaptations. There is also a question that agricultural researchers have started asking more directly in the past 2 decades. Are Amish farms actually more productive, or do they just appear that way because they are measured differently? Commercial farms optimize for commodity yield per acre, bushels of corn, tons of soybeans. Amish farms produce diversified output: corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, root vegetables, herbs, fruit, dairy, and eggs from the same acreage. If you count only corn bushels, the commercial farm wins easily. If you count total caloric output per acre, including all crops, the comparison changes significantly. Some agricultural economists now argue that the Amish system produces more total food from the same land, just not more of any single commodity. That is a genuinely different way of measuring agricultural success. The Rodale Institute's Farming Systems Trial, running continuously since 1981, is the longest-running scientific comparison of organic and conventional farming in North America. Its findings are relevant here. After the first few transition years, organic plots in the trial matched conventional plots in yield for most crops, with 0 synthetic inputs. Soil quality in organic plots improved year over year. In drought years, organic plots outperformed conventional ones because higher organic matter content retained more water. The trial did not study Amish farms directly, but its results validate the mechanisms that Amish practices rely on. Soil biology, organic matter, and diversity outperform chemical inputs over long time horizons. The Rodale data gives scientific grounding to what Amish farmers have been observing empirically for generations. But here is what the Rodale trial also found, and what most popular accounts of organic farming leave out. The transition period is hard. For the first 3 to 5 years after switching from synthetic inputs to organic methods, yields often drop. The soil biology that makes organic systems work takes time to establish. Mycorrhizal networks that carry nutrients to roots need seasons to colonize new beds. The weed seed bank, which conventional herbicides suppressed, resurfaces aggressively when herbicides stop. A gardener who switches entirely to these methods in year 1 and expects doubled yields in year 2 will be disappointed. The Amish system works because it has been running continuously for generations. Starting it from scratch requires patience through a transition that produces less before it produces more. The transition problem points to a deeper truth about what the Amish have that most people trying to adopt their methods do not. It is not just the techniques. It is the accumulated soil capital, 30, 50, 100 years of continuous organic matter addition, biological community development, and undisturbed earthworm populations in the same beds. You cannot buy that. You can only build it, slowly, one season at a time. An Amish gardener inheriting a family plot inherits something invisible and genuinely valuable, soil that is already alive in a way that newly converted beds are not yet. This is the part that does not fit neatly into a list of tricks. The tricks work because the soil they are applied to has been prepared for decades. The list and the soil are inseparable. Consider what a fully mature Amish kitchen garden looks like in July. The beds are dense, plants spaced at the minimum distance that allows root development, not the wide rows that make mechanical cultivation easy. Mulch covers every exposed soil surface. Vertical structures occupy the bed edges. Herbs are interspersed throughout, rather than segregated in a separate section. The effect is layered. Tall crops shading medium crops, shading ground-level crops, each occupying a different light level and root zone. This is called polyculture, multiple crops sharing the same space in complementary ways. The garden is not organized for visual tidiness. It is organized for maximum biological efficiency. It does not look like a model garden from a magazine. It looks like something that knows exactly what it is doing. The morning light comes in low across the kitchen garden. Dew sits on the bean leaves. The corn is at shoulder height, with bean vines already spiraling up the stalks. The squash below has closed the ground entirely. No bare soil visible anywhere between the plants. The cold frame lid is propped open to vent the overnight warmth. The compost pile at the garden's edge is steaming faintly in the cool air. The farm journal lies open on the porch railing, yesterday's entry still drying. The garden is not waiting for an input, it is already working. The soil underneath all of it is alive with biology that took 20 years of autumn additions to establish. The harvest that comes from this ground in August did not begin in May. It began the October before last. When researchers from Penn State's College of Agricultural Sciences surveyed Lancaster County farms in the early 2000s, they found something that surprised them. Amish farms were not just productive, they were getting more productive over time, while neighboring conventional farms were maintaining yields only by increasing their input costs. The Amish farms were building productive capacity into the land itself. The conventional farms were renting it from a bag of fertilizer. This gap has widened in the years since, particularly as the cost of synthetic nitrogen has tracked the price of natural gas. Every year that fertilizer prices rise, the economic advantage of a self-sustaining organic system increases. The Amish did not plan for this. They simply never stopped doing what worked. There is a broader movement now drawing on exactly these principles. The regenerative agriculture movement, which has attracted serious interest from agronomists, soil scientists, and a growing number of commercial farmers, advocates for practices that would be recognizable to any Amish gardener. Cover cropping, compost application, crop diversity, minimal tillage, continuous ground cover. The terminology is newer. The underlying mechanics are not. Regenerative agriculture is, in large part, the rediscovery by mainstream science of what traditional farming communities never abandoned. The Amish did not need to wait for peer-reviewed confirmation. But the peer review has now arrived, and it largely confirms what 300 years of Lancaster County farming already demonstrated. What is the practical takeaway for someone with a standard backyard plot? Start with the techniques that produce returns in the first season without requiring established soil biology. Succession planting costs nothing and works immediately. Continuous harvesting at peak costs nothing and works immediately. Late afternoon watering costs nothing and works immediately. Cold frames require only salvaged materials and extend your season in year one. These four alone will produce a noticeable difference in the first summer. Then begin the slow work. Fall compost application, cover cropping through winter, seed saving from your best performers. These build the soil capital that will amplify every other technique over the following years. The list is not a recipe to execute all at once. It is a sequence with some parts that pay off now and others that pay off later. There is something worth sitting with in all of this. The techniques described here are not secret. They are not proprietary. Many of them appear in gardening books from the 1950s, the 1850s, even earlier. What the Amish preserved is not knowledge, it is practice. The difference between knowing that fall compost application improves spring soil and actually doing it every single autumn for 40 years is not a knowledge gap, it is a discipline gap. The techniques are available to anyone. The discipline to execute them consistently, season after season, without being distracted by newer products or easier methods. That is what actually separates a garden that merely functions from one that genuinely thrives over decades. It is worth noting what is absent from Amish gardens. There are no soil amendment products with branded labels, no pH adjusters in plastic bottles, no starter fertilizers marketed for specific vegetables, no pest sprays, even organic certified ones. Not because the Amish reject all of these philosophically, some newer Amish farming communities do use approved organic products. But because a garden running on mature biology and correct timing simply does not generate the problems these products exist to solve. Fungal disease is reduced by proper watering timing. Nutrient deficiency is prevented by continuous compost input. Pest pressure is managed by diversity and observation. The products fill gaps that the system itself closes. Remove the gaps, and the products become unnecessary. The question of whether these methods scale is legitimate, and the answer is genuinely mixed. For a kitchen garden or small market garden, under an acre, most of these techniques are directly applicable and have been verified by independent organic growers across many climate zones. For large-scale commodity production, the picture is more complicated. Weed management, without herbicides at scale, requires mechanical cultivation and labor that most industrial farming operations cannot economically sustain. Compost at the volume needed for hundreds of acres requires either livestock or purchased inputs. The Amish solution to scale is simple. They do not try to scale. Family farms stay family-sized. Productivity per acre stays high. The model is not designed for 1,000 acres of corn. It was never designed for that. The seed-saving practice deserves a second look because its implications run deeper than just free seeds. Commercial hybrid varieties are engineered for uniformity, shelf life, and performance under synthetic fertility. They are optimized for the average. Open-pollinated varieties, selected year after year on one farm, are optimized for the specific. Over time, farm-adapted seeds from consistent selective saving will outperform commercial varieties on that specific farm, not because they are inherently superior, but because they have been selected for exactly the conditions they will face. This is micro-scale plant breeding, conducted informally over generations. The Amish have been doing it since before modern plant genetics existed as a discipline. Some of the heirloom varieties circulating in the seed-saving community today trace back to Amish farms. There is one final element of the Amish system that is almost impossible to replicate outside the cultural context that produces it. These techniques work in part because they are practiced by an entire community on neighboring farms simultaneously. When an Amish community rotates crops across a region, pest populations in the whole landscape are disrupted. When all farms maintain high organic matter, the water table behaves differently during drought. When all farms grow similar heritage varieties, local seed adaptation is collective. The community is the unit of agricultural practice, not the individual farm. A single gardener adopting 10 of these 17 techniques will see real results. But the full power of the system only appears when everyone within reach is doing it together. What these 17 techniques reveal, taken together, is a set of priorities that runs exactly counter to how most modern gardeners think about productivity. Modern gardening culture focuses on inputs, what to add, what to spray, what to buy. The Amish system focuses on conditions. What state is the soil in? What stage of growth is the plant at? What is the timing relative to temperature and season? The inputs are minimal because the conditions are managed. This is not a small philosophical difference. It is the entire structure of the approach. Getting conditions right requires observation, patience, and time. It cannot be compressed into a single weekend purchase. But it compounds. Conditions that are right this year make next year easier, and the year after that easier still. In the past decade, as interest in food security and local production has risen sharply, researchers have begun documenting Amish agricultural knowledge in ways that were not previously systematic. The concern driving some of this documentation is real. The Amish population has been growing fast, doubling roughly every 20 years. And as communities expand into new territories, some of the oldest farming, that knowledge is held in practice and in those handwritten journals, not in any database. If the practice changes or the journals are lost, the knowledge goes with them. Several academic projects are now working to record it before the generation that holds it in living memory passes. The 17 techniques listed here are a beginning, not a complete picture. They are the most transferable, the most verified, and the most accessible across different garden sizes and climates. But each one, followed seriously, opens into a deeper layer of practice. Companion planting leads to understanding plant communication through root exudates. Seed saving leads to understanding local climate adaptation. Cover cropping leads to understanding soil food webs. The list is an entry point. The Amish system is not a set of tips. It is a way of seeing a garden as a biological community that you manage rather than a production system that you supply. That shift in perspective is what the list is pointing toward. The techniques are just how it shows up in practice. 300 years is a long time to test a gardening system. The Amish did not set out to run an agricultural experiment. They set out to feed their families from their land without spending money they did not have on inputs from outside. The methods that survived 300 growing seasons on the same plots in Lancaster County survived because they worked repeatedly across generations, across variable weather, across economic pressures that crushed many of their conventional farming neighbors. That is a longer and more demanding trial than any controlled study. The soil on those farms is the result. Deep, dark, alive, and still improving. It took 3 centuries to build. Any gardener who starts building it today is 3 centuries behind, but starting is the only way to eventually get there. Which of these 17 techniques are you already using? And which one do you think would make the biggest difference if you started it this season? Tell me in the comments below.